Let me introduce myself. My name is Luke Youngblood, the CEO and founder of Blockscale, and I've been an advisor to Mina protocol. So let's see, I've been involved in proof of stake for about 3 years now. I started in early 2018, and I helped the Tezos Foundation BetaNet launch. I built the Tezos Foundation validator infrastructure. And then since then, I've been involved in a lot of incentivized testnets. Cosmos Game of Stakes was one of the first. Kind of set the, set this gold standard.
It is the first. It is the first.
Yeah, that was the first incentivized testnet. It set the gold standard, right, for what incentivized testnets could be. And also, I've been, of course, in the Mina Genesis, and it's been really exciting. And I also work at Coinbase on staking as well. So excited to be here. Zaki, why don't you go for it?
I'm Zaki Manian. I'm one of the co-founders of Iqlusion. Iqlusion is a validator and protocol development organization. We work on Cosmos. We work on Mina. We're on a bunch of other networks. I'd say a lot of when I started, when we did Game of Stakes, I don't think I could have ever imagined the number of incentivized testnets that would get kicked off. But it was an extremely versatile and successful idea that has worked out. That really got incentives right to build a robust validator community, and it's been great to see how much it's inspired all of the other proof of stake networks that we're launching. That work will continue basically forever, I think.
Yeah, I mean, actually, let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, I think one of the things that was really inspiring about Game of Stakes and has sort of resonated, I think, with all the L1s that have also launched incentivized testnets is that it did two things really well. First of all, it helped with token distribution, right? Because a lot of these new networks are funded by VCs, or they have a very small initial amount of token holders, right? So it helps decentralize the network and get your token distribution right from day one. And it also incentivizes delegations from the foundation to the operators, the node operators that are the most professional, that had the best uptime, that had that were providing community services like block explorers and other things like that. And I thought that was really effective. So do you want to kind of talk a little bit about that?
So absolutely. These were the goals of Game of Stakes. This is the goals that when Game of Stakes demonstrated that this would work, this is why so many projects have followed it, because there are some things that don't really work super well at in these early days of proof of stake. We're still in the early days of proof of stake. There was a sort of early generation of proof of stake where these proof of stake networks were notionally proof of stake, but the tokens were very closely held. And it was basically whales who ran, and the projects that ran their networks. And that was sort of characteristic of the first generation of proof of stake networks. And with Cosmos, I felt my mission was to prove that you could do something else, that you could actually, there are tendencies towards, all of the stake accumulates in exchanges, all of the stake accumulates with whales, but there are countervailing tendencies that you can build, and we can talk a little bit about what those countervailing tendencies are. But it's been the tensions and the dynamics and the sort of battle that started with Game of Stakes, I think, has just characterized the last 2 years of proof of stake.
Yeah, it's been super interesting to watch, because I think unless you're a network like Bitcoin where it's proof of work and everyone has an equal opportunity to mine, or you're like a network like Ethereum where you had thousands of people that were in your ICO, you're not going to have good token distribution or fair token distribution day one. And so, we have to kind of figure out how to make that happen. And so it's a really interesting way to do it. And I think Mina has actually been a great example of how to do this effectively. I've been really impressed with the Genesis program. And incentivizing everyone, it's helped build a really strong validator community, and it's been really fun to participate in that. Did you have any cool lessons learned or stories from the Mina Genesis?
what I'll say about the Mina testnet is the Mina testnet has, in the most ways of all the testnets that I've participated in the last 2 years, reminds me the most of Cosmos Game of Stakes. And the things about it that remind me a lot about Cosmos Game of Stakes was, one, it was not dominated by, like, when Cosmos Game of Stakes started, the professional validator community didn't exist. So it had this very like organic grassroots feeling of people meeting each other in chat rooms, like putting together validators. And one of the things that I think the Mina project really wanted, and I tried to help as much as possible them getting, is they wanted to start outside of the professional validator community. They really wanted to go find a new community. And I think that was really good. The second piece of it is so that was one thing. The other thing of it that really reminded me of the Tendermint and Cosmos process is like just how like this was a very much like a frontier research project at the time it at launch, in the same way that Cosmos was a frontier research project 2 years ago. And the process of like maturing the system and you know the ways in which the testnet found challenges that the internal QA system wasn't finding, and the interplay between product development and protocol development and the testnet was a very complex feedback loop, and that's for projects that are more like Tendermint, and for people who are either building their own stack that was very similar to Tendermint or using Tendermint itself. Like they could use a lot of the lessons that we learned in our testnet. And Mina is so different, with the succinct blockchain, with a different with like a novel consensus protocol, with all these different pieces, that like they had to forge new ground. And that reminded me a lot of the Cosmos process.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating, the distinction between, hobbyist and professional, if you will, because we are all hobbyists in the early days, and proof of stake is such a relatively new technology. I mean, it does in some ways remind me of visiting a friend of mine that launched. He was one of the first internet service providers in like the 90s. And at the time, I mean, he showed me some of his old equipment, which was like literally dial-up modems, like hundreds of dial-up modems attached to plywood and hung up on the walls. And this was like basically in the early days. And you think of like the infancy of proof of stake, where people are running validators at home. They're using like ledgers as for signing key for their cold storage and things like that. And then as things mature and become more professional, and then we move into data centers and we have professional high-end hardware, I find that there's not that much distinction. A validator that's a hobbyist running at home and learned how to do this in a couple of years probably has as much experience, if not more, than a lot of the professional people. Perhaps he would just evolve into, or they would just evolve into like learning how to do it in a more professional way, building in data centers and in cloud as opposed to at home. But the concepts and the tools and the infrastructure we have to build to get there it is probably this similar for everyone. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Different networks have valued this like home validator community to a different extent. And like one of the things I've had a hard time quantifying is how much you value the home validator community then like kind of propagates through your entire system. And so, part of the, I think part of the reality is like, as you're trying to figure this out, it's like, okay, like, so you have professional validators, you have the professional validators, you have the exchange validators. There's always going to be, and I think those things have a lot of advantages. Like, it's easy, if you're a professional, you have a marketing person, you can build media content, you can build community content, you can build public goods, you can do lots of stuff to market yourself as a validator. You can make a lot of progress that way. As a professional validators also get a lot of outreach to like the funds who aren't yet ready to, who own a lot of these tokens, but aren't ready to stake themselves, and frequently find themselves having networks that their custodians aren't ready to also be validators on yet. So all of these dynamics also play out. And then you have the home validators, and I'm not really sure how many home validators there are and like what the future of that space is. For ETH 2.0, it's like one of their core principles. And I think Mina has kind of a similar attitude where they're like, We want people to be able to run out of their homes. But as a person who runs these validators and like, you know, you're like, it's like when you're down, it's like publicly visible, right? And so there's like a embarrassment aspect to it, to like not doing a good job. And so there's kind of like Iqlusion isn't as built out as some of these networks. When we launched 2 years ago, we were probably one of the most built out network. We have this really great blog post that Tony wrote, one of my co-founders, about like our hardware setup. And that hardware setup has evolved over time to add new functionality. But you know, I know there are validators that are running much more complicated setups now, supporting like all kinds of different hardware requirements. And we definitely need to scale, and it's been hard to go to the data center this year because of the pandemic.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's been fascinating to kind of see the diversity of setups across the Mina Genesis program. I'm sure we have everyone from very professional multi-data center setups, people running multiple block producers in the cloud and on physical bare metal, and then everything to, you know, the hobbyists at home just running a single validator on a Linux box. Yeah, we see a wide range and a wide variety. I think there are some commonalities, though, that I see across validators. I think it's become very popular, depending on the networks, to validate in environments like Hetzner. Seems to be a very popular choice because you can procure bare metal servers at a data center in Germany for a very low cost.
Yep.
Now, the challenge there for the networks, though, I think, is if, you know, half of your validator community is in a single data center in Germany, that's probably not the most decentralized network. And you might have, we might have issues with the chain halting if they ever have a bad weather day on the internet.
Solana had an issue with this recently about like there was going to be a downtime in one of the Hessler data centers. And like, I think they had a problem with like when the downtime was expected, there was like more than a third of the network in that one data center. And so, you know, this is the other thing is like, so like, you know, the heavier and more specialized your hardware requirements are as a protocol, especially in the early days, you know, that's also an anti-decentralizing force. But, you know, the other thing is, you know, validate, you know, if your hardware requirements are more unique, it does occasionally favor like sort of the sort of specialist professional validators over like exchanges, et cetera, who are less able to like easily adapt their processes and procedures to like unique hardware requirements.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to talk about really quick is like as a validator service, how do you think about whether you sell or hold the tokens that you earn for validating or for receiving delegations? For me personally, what I've tried to do is I've tried to hold on to as many tokens as possible and be long the protocol, because, you know, effectively if you are validating, you are basically long the protocol, and you know, you probably want the protocol to grow and to succeed and flourish, and for more use cases to be built on that network and more interesting applications to be built on top of it. And also I find that holding the tokens, if you can, tends to be more profitable long-term. A lot of these incentivized testnets that I've participated in personally, the tokens were not worth that much when the network launched, but after growing for a couple of years, they're doing pretty well now. What do you think about that at Iqlusion? Do you hold or sell most of your tokens that you earn?
I mean, we hold quite a bit of tokens. Like our token balance sheet has grown, you know, it's like our token balance sheet is several $1 million right now.
Nice.
Of tokens, right? You know, in this bull market. And it's not like we did every test net. You know, we have left tens of millions of dollars on the table. But we are also primarily not just a validator. We're primarily a protocol dev shop. And like what we do is we work on new protocols. So that's like a big part of like who we are and what our business is. But, you know, I think the biggest thing has been, you know, what I've been hoping for and like is starting to come to pass is that you're seeing more and more that if like you are long the protocol, you want to be a validator. And if you are not long the protocol, you're going to sell your tokens and leave. The sort of the mercenary validators are probably like mercenary validators are really harmful to the networks. And my hope has always been that we can that they would get filtered out over time. And it would and the validator networks would become much more folks who are like sort of structurally along the protocol, and are active participants, sort of in the protocol politics of their evolution and future. And hopefully I've been seeing that happen more and more. I'd say I was most worried about this like a year ago in 2020. And I've been really pleased with sort of how things have started to shift away from that.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen on the Tezos network, we've seen a few validators drop out that were relatively large, and they just decided, like Cryptium, for example, left recently, and they just decided, hey, we're no longer going to validate on these networks, and so please delegate to someone else. And it's a little bit chaotic because with delegations, a lot of the delegator community doesn't really pay attention to what their validator is doing. They delegate once. It's like a set it and forget it type of thing. And then they don't pay attention, and they might not realize their validator is shut down, and they're not earning anything from that point on, which would be disappointing for a delegator. But yeah, I mean, we do want to discourage these mercenary validators. And I think, it doesn't make sense to be a validator on a network and try to build a business and receive a lot of delegations if you're just planning on leaving in a few months, because you're basically spending all this time and effort and energy and investing resources in something that you're just going to abandon. So I think you really want to think of it as more of a long term. At least that's my approach.
I think this is the Cryptium scenario is like a really great example, actually, of like how the validator business is evolving over time.
Yeah.
So Cryptium was a structurally wrong Tezos entity. They were involved in Tezos Dev for Metastate, which was their sort of protocol dev arm, and they were also structurally along, and then they were also running a very successful independent Tezos validator, and then they made a business decision. They made a business decision to like focus on a new protocol that they're building. There was a talk about it at the ZK Validator event on Friday. They have it's called Anoa. It's pretty cool. It's like private decentralized bartering, basically. Mm-hmm. It's a very cool thing. It's a Cosmos zone. It's very cool. And then, like, for the same reason, they sort of dropped their and so I think you're going to see, and again, these tensions are increasing. I see more and more validators building protocol dev expertise internally. And it's always going to be an interesting tension between like, what networks they participate in actively and what networks that they sort of drop out of, they drop out of. But it's basically like, for Iqlusion at least, any network in which we're not like sort of like socially tied into, we're probably not going to be a validator.
So there's a good question here in the Q&A section I want to answer. It's from Shiny Cakes. He says, it's pretty hard to grow marketing wise as a validator when people delegating. What would you recommend to do to be seen? And another guy Blue asked how to weed out mercenaries. I think these are the way I kind of think of differentiating yourself. One way to do it is like what Zaki mentioned, doing protocol development and participating in improving the protocols themselves. Because if the community knows,
it doesn't actually, as far as I can tell, result in that much additional delegation. I'm not going to jump down. So the second point that you were going to make, but you can monetize protocol dev in other ways. Foundation grants.
But I think it is important because if people see that you're active in building new features and improving the network, they're going to be more likely to delegate to you. But another way that's perhaps more differentiating is something like, for example, Gareth in the Mina community. He's been really great. And I think everyone on the Discord has gotten help from him at some time or another. He's just been really helpful. So just participating in the community like that can certainly help you get more delegations, but building public goods. So like, I believe Gareth built Mina Explorer, right? Build a block explorer for the blockchain or the network you're a validator on. That will earn you a ton of goodwill. You'll probably get delegations just from holders that use your block explorer and appreciate like the public good you offer to the community. There's probably other examples of that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think how to weed out mercenaries, like, if your validator is not providing any public goods or is just charging a high fee and not giving much to the network in return. Maybe find a validator that does provide public goods.
Yeah. I mean, I think delegators should be more and the social consciousness of delegators is just improving in the Cosmos community. And that's been people are starting to understand that some validators add value and make number go up, and some validators do not. And that's the way it should be. And some validators get you airdrops and some validators don't. And these are all things that matter. And so you probably want to be more engaged with validators that are out there kind of fighting the good fight for protocols and are actively engaged. And that's what's filtered out the mercenaries, right? That's the natural tendency that filters out the mercenaries, because the mercenaries can't do everything.
And another thing that's really that I'm really excited about seeing is that as the layer 1 itself matures and people start to build layer 2, layer 3 apps on top of it, a lot of validators can differentiate themselves by building those apps. So for example, I mean, we're just in the infancy of seeing this, but some friends of mine and I'm an advisor to them, built a stablecoin on Tezos. And if you can basically delegate to them and you can mint a stablecoin from your delegating smart contract. So there's ways that validators can start to build DeFi protocols on top of the protocol and sort of reward their delegators. And I think that's going to be a really exciting trend. So it's why would I delegate to you if I just get a staking reward? Now I can not only get a staking reward, but maybe I get a token that I can use to participate in some other activity on chain. So that's, I think, a way validators can differentiate themselves, build some DeFi applications, build a DEX or something, and then make it so that the DEX's liquidity pools can be delegated to you, and you can earn a reward and be a liquidity provider. These are all things that could happen on a lot of these networks now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, there are many layers of this, and this is definitely more your validator differentiation is validators will probably differentiate themselves more with software development and community presence than they will from how cool their branding and logo is. Especially as we just have more and more capabilities of sort of playing games.
Here's another question that maybe you want to take this one, Zaki. Is there an optimal number of validators?
I don't think that there's an optimal number of validators. I think I'm still I don't like what E2 does for their validator system. I don't like having systems that don't have delegation. I basically think that, we are in another year or two, if you don't have staking derivatives and delegation built into your protocol, you're not a modern proof of stake protocol. I think that there's going to be an enormous amount of that. And I don't, as long as the entry point into being a validator in your system feels affordable, feels like within the amount of capital that an individual entrepreneur can raise, it's good. And with Cosmos, people criticize Cosmos for having 100 validator slots, and I do think the buy-in for the Cosmos Hub is a little bit on the high side right now. But IBC is launching in 13 hours, 12 hours.
Congratulations!
So anyone can be a validator on a money moving network tomorrow in the Cosmos ecosystem. 32 ETH is almost $100,000 now, which is similar to the buy-in right now. I think. Well, no, the Atom buy-in is probably now more than that. But I do think we need to keep having that initial entry point into the network be a relatively low level is not a bad thing.
No, I think it helps definitely. And I mean, there's really good reasons why BFT, Byzantine fault tolerant protocols, can't expand beyond a couple hundred validators max.
That's actually not true.
Well, perhaps you come up with a way we can grow to 300 or more.
There's no difference between what's happening on E2 with 500,000 validators and Tendermint. it turns out you can scale BFT pretty large to like pretty large values.
You have to create like subcommittees or something like that, right? Or something perhaps.
Yeah, you do have to create subcommittees.
Yeah. But yeah, that's super interesting. I think more and more, having derivatives and things like that are going to be more and more popular. So for example, I delegate my staked coins to you, and now I can use that liquidity to mint a synthetic asset. Like these type of new synthetic derivatives that are built on top of staking are going to be super powerful because there's basically all of this liquidity locked in staking on a lot of these L1s. People want to do something with the liquidity besides just stake. So I think that's going to become more and more popular. We have 2 minutes left. Any last thoughts? What should we cover? Let's see. Look at questions.
I would just say that, like, in general, it continues to be a great time to become a validator. Just again, like all of these proof of stake networks continue to grow. It's a great time to be a validator. Probably and validators as businesses are starting to mature. Accounting, taxes, all of these things are huge challenges, and hopefully more support is going to come for those kinds of things as these businesses mature.
I agree with that. It's a great time to be a validator. People always think, oh, maybe I missed the boat. It's too late to get involved. I don't think it's too late. It's still the early days. Mainnet just launched, and yeah, it's never too late to get involved. Everyone thinks, oh, I missed the boat. The crypto has already sailed, right? But it hasn't. Let's validate and earn some money and help these networks grow.